Peter Hall, fourth generation farming here in Marden. I was educated at Y, did my degree at Y when it was an agricultural college, and left in 1980 and have been managing the farm here ever since. We used to grow a lot of hops, but now we're, I suppose, about 60 acres of tree fruit, apples, pears, plums, a couple of 100 acres of arable, 100 acres of grass, and bits and pieces of woodland. We've also got 12 acres of grapes on the farm. My brother makes a sparkling wine, Herbert Hall, named after our great-grandfather. We really started back in the 1980s doing all sorts of countryside stewardship in terms of regenerating ponds, replanting bits of hedgerows, those kind of things. And actually, some of it's been driven by legislation. So once conservation headlands were introduced to produce buffer zones for pesticides with waterways and hedgerows, that was obviously relevant to us. But subsequently, we've been planting winter bird seed crops around the edges and in funny corners. We'd put in a large wetland flood defence with KCC highways, which has become a magnet for wildlife, as well as working with that. We've adopted a huge number of the government's environmental land management schemes, one of which we're standing in the middle, goes by the name of AB11. The idea is to produce flushes of annual weeds very sparsely across the land, so that the turtle doves, of which we have a number in and around the farm, when they arrive from their migration into the country, have got plenty of weed seeds from these the little annual plants that are colonising. We've used pigs to dig this over and turn the ground over and get rid of the weeds, for example. So we're using livestock quite a bit, very extensively, mostly belongs to other people, but to manage the understory in orchards or in pieces of woodland, for example, restructuring woodland, all this. We're using on other bits of the farm, we've got bits that flood through the winter, so that's basically designated as overwintering wildfowl and waders. And in fact, in terms of success rate, we've had an ever-increasing levels of lapwing flocks, which had almost disappeared. And for the first time this year, since I was a child, so that would have been in the 1960s, we've actually managed to fledge 3 lapwing chicks, which is quite extraordinary and what we would call a great success. We're still producing food, significant amounts of food, but we're also maximising the ability of the farm to host all sorts of projects that hopefully meet making space for nature targets. The water body you see is about 5 acres altogether. It stretches at least as much in that direction as it does, you can see behind me that way. It was dug as a flood defence, as sort of Operation Stack for water. So when, as we know, the lower Weald floods quite dramatically when it does happen, this wetland fills up with water at the incoming end. There is an overflow down there that takes it back into the river and back onto the floodplain if it fills right up. It's about 20,000 cubic metres is the amount of water it can hold, which is not enormous, but it's a help, and it was a prototype. So it fills up. When the flooding stops and the tide goes out across the Weald, it goes into reverse and the water flows back through the pipe it came in through, down through these wet bits of willow bog, if you like, very slowly. During that period, all the suspended detritus, all the mud and muck and everything else that's suspended in the water when in the flood water drops out, and it comes down through the ditch behind you, back into the main waterway, absolutely gin clear. And this was constructed, as I say, by KCC Highways with us. When we left it, all the dirt out of the bottom was absolute clay, heavy clay. It was thrown up onto the sides. So what you see around me was, when we finished, it looked just like a rolled collection of golf ball-sized lumps of clay. Absolutely nothing for 3 years maybe, and suddenly we've done nothing here except leave it, and suddenly the plants have recolonized, or gradually but rapidly in the last 2 years the plants have recolonized. And with a local botanist we had a look at it in May actually, to see what was here, and I'm sure there'll be other species that will have appeared subsequently, but I think there were over 70 different species growing on the ground, with, of course, all the attendant benefits for insects, for birds. This water as well is very close to the ground that we've been trying to grow annual weeds for the incoming turtle doves. Turtle doves also need water. They feed their young on crop milk, they need water, and this is a fantastic site because there is a little bit of water in it. It's not designed to hold water for any length of time, but simply because it's got a clay bottom it does. So there's water, except in the dry summers there's water here all the time. The other actually interesting thing is, if you'll probably see round the very edge, the interface between the water and the soil, there's a damp piece, a damp piece of clay. It's always wet on that interface. And we've got a huge colony of house martins on our oast house in our main farm buildings. And historically, the colony was depleted down to really very little. We put artificial nest boxes up, which it's not unusual in September to see 200 birds, individual birds, warming up on the roof of the building prior to migrating. But they now have access to clay that is absolutely unbelievably good as a building material. And it does work beautifully as a flood defence. It does exactly what it was designed to do. But as you can see, there's the most amazing now flora that's developed around it on this very, very unfertile ground.